like the way I think about this is right. Like if talking about diversity and inclusion is that if you start a remote company, you have the unique opportunity to build a diverse team, because if you hire from anywhere and you do a relatively job of doing so somewhat equally across the world, aren't you just going to end up with a diverse team? That's my theory, and at least before I get you to say all sorts of things about how that's not true, we tried this. So at remote, we try to do a good job of just saying you can work from wherever you want to work, and we will hire the best person we could find. We make sure to like check our biases when hiring, and what we see. So we actually have a quite well diverse team in every sense of the way. I think in terms of where people live, where people are from, in terms of gender diversity and age diversity and race diversity. So I think, I mean, I like to take ourselves as the proof that it is possible, although we're still a small company with about 50 employees. Love to hear what you think about this. How do remote and diversity and inclusion play together?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you're spot on. I amen and hallelujah to everything that you're saying, because yes, absolutely. Naturally, there's going to be a higher level of diversity just for the fact that you are not recruiting from the same, 20-mile radius to your office, because geographic areas include a certain level of sameness of all of the people in that area. People live there because they like the same weather, they live in the same culture, they have exposure to the same news cycles, they share similar stories and bonding experiences that have happened in the area. I mean, there's just so much homogeneous experiences in a culture that unite them together, even though there is diversity within that local area. So even just for the fact of hiring from somewhere outside of your local city or county, you're going to automatically increase diversity of perspective. But then the next level is when you start to do this with intention and you start to say, okay, what perspectives do we want to bring to our team? What perspectives and experiences do we want to plug into our production cycles and operations? And that's where it really becomes not only a benefit, but a strategy for the growth and development of your company. And I agree with you, it's one of the most underutilized techniques of distributed companies. I mean, when we're opening it up and saying anybody can hire from anywhere, that's great for expanding our talent pool. But if we're not really thinking deeply about who we're trying to reach, not just quantity, but quality of the candidates that are applying, then we're missing out on an opportunity, I think.
And so, I mean, you mentioned already that's being underutilized, but what do you see? You talk with companies far greater than the company I run. What do you see there?
I think that the talent acquisition funnel needs to be very, very strongly adapted for this. So often when companies start to go remote, they see a massive spike in application rates to an average about 3,000% increase in applications. And that was prior to COVID. Yeah. So they're certainly reaching that volume of talent, and that's great. But that's only quantity, that's not quality. So what we try to help them do is identify who are you trying to reach and helping them zero into specific talent pools for that region or reason. So, are you trying to reach your target market? Let's try to attract that, suburban housewife that you're trying to market your product to. Let's go hire one of them. Or are you trying to reach inner city youth from underprivileged backgrounds? Let's go hire one of them. Like, let's target those regions. Or maybe there are specific talent pools in certain universities or certain countries that make it more relevant to your product or to your hiring goals. Let's hire from those regions. So it's not just hiring from anywhere, it's hiring from very specific places because you can hire from there instead of your local city.
Yeah, it's a very interesting idea. I really thought of it like hiring from a very specific place. Wouldn't you then end up following the same biases that you've had before, even through selection of the place where you would hire?
You know, I think the entire conversation about diversity and inclusion is a very slippery slope, no matter what, right? Like it's always a slippery slope, but
Yeah.
especially in remote work, like we've seen this massive explosion of people being discriminated against because they're in their home and they're seeing their personal lives to a higher level. So there's this amazingly delicate dichotomy in which we have this opportunity to increase diversity and inclusion and strengthen it to an unprecedented level. But then at the same time, we also have the risk and danger of discriminating more than we ever have in the history of business at the exact same time. So there's a lot of very careful strategy and innovation and critical thinking that needs to go into this topic.
So let's try to not go down the slippery slope too much. I think I spoke with Teo Roxanne last week. We went into this a little bit. We went a little bit further down the slippery slope. So let's switch to onboarding. Like let's say that you are actually building one of these teams, which is from all over the world or well distributed, or maybe from a specific region, like you suggested. Do we have to think differently about how we bring people on? Is there some different considerations that we have to make when onboarding them?
Well, absolutely. Well, you tell me first. I'm doing so much talking. So you tell me what you love about the onboarding programs that you've designed and that you've been a part of. Like, what are your favorite parts that you think have worked very well and have been specific to remote work?
Yeah, I think, so specific to remote work, I think the secret is to make sure people get to talk to a lot of other people. And I think the beauty of remote work is that the distance between everybody is the same. It's, one Slack message away. So I think for what always helped me and helped the people in the teams that I was in was to just talk with everybody. Like it's so simple, but it really works. Is to just have one-on-one calls with a large part of the team, everybody if you're small, but as the organization grows, with at least one person in every department. So you start to form connections throughout the organization. And just do that for literally everybody that joins the company, independent of where they are. If they are in leadership or if they are an individual contributor, just make sure they talk with a whole bunch of people throughout the organization. That's a really simple and powerful trick. And then everything else, I think, as a remote organization, should already be working on activities that help bonding and that help make sure people get to know each other, and just roll those people up into that. I think that really, like anything we do, and we do lots of things, but I think that is the most important thing. And to me, if you're talking about like, well, we're building this distributed team with people in all sorts of regions of the world from all sorts of different cultures, that works for everybody. There's like no difference in that. As long as everybody in the organization is a nice person, is a kind person that can acknowledge that there's cultural differences, that there's, that most of us are speaking our second or third language and not our native language, then that works extremely well. Like I think to me, it's one of the greatest enjoyments to learn from people around the world, like what is, to learn about their cultures, about the things that they like, they don't like, what is weird, what is special. I love that. Like, it always ends up talking about food, which we do all the time with remote.
Yeah, we don't eat it together anymore, but we certainly talk about it all the time.
Yeah, it's really great. We always
have a whole food channel on Slack.
I think everybody
recipes.
has one. Yeah,
I know.
It's very awful. You always have the same 3 colleagues that like are amazing cooks, and they're just making you all feel very bad about your poor cooking skills.
But so true.
That's it to me. I really find it very easy to do this as long as everybody acknowledges like the obvious, which is we're not all speaking the same language and we don't all have the same background. And that's the best part of this, which sounds so cheesy, but it works so well if you just talk with each other. So
exactly.
I don't know.
There's so much
I went off the rails, but yeah.
No, but it's true. But it helps you, I think, come together as a group often when you're in a group where there is so much, I don't want to say unity, but sameness, right? Sameness. Sameness. Yeah, when there is everybody's the same, then it's like, okay, you forget. How do I say this? You get so caught up in trying to define what makes you different that you start to pull apart from each other, because there's so much that you all have in common that you have to create your identity by showing what you have that's different. However, when you have a team that's so different, you pull together because you're trying to find what you have in common, because that's the rare element. And so it really builds culture the more diverse that you are. And it's so ironic, I think, when companies ask us, how in the world do we onboard people? Like, we're not going to have the opportunity to mentor. They're not going to be able to talk to people. They're not going to be able to do any of those things. And it's like, says who?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
wait, what? Like, no, they absolutely still need to have those experiences of meeting the executives and meeting their team members and observing meetings and having mentorship calls and completing paperwork and completing training. Like, all of that still happens. It's just happening in a different place and in a different channel, which can be more effective. But like all things with remote, it's got to come in with intention. You've got to have this very carefully designed program that facilitates those experiences. It's not going to happen quite as organically and naturally as it has been in the office. But the thing is, it didn't happen organically and naturally before either. All of the onboarding programs that we're used to now had to be carefully designed with intention. There was years of trial and error and identifying that people felt disconnected, and so they thought of a solution. Like, that came from literally hundreds of years of evolution of business and co-located work. And so now we're just going through the same adaptation of how do we take all of the lessons that we learned then and apply them to new channels. And I think that's what people get caught up in, is that communication channel, because so much of how we're learning in a co-located environment is through observation. We're just watching things happen. And that is a mode of communication. But in a distributed environment, you don't have access to that channel. So you have to go to a different channel. And that's why that you see, more handbooks and more videos and resources like that, because they're just communicating the same things through different channels. Like, I'm going to articulate what our culture is, as opposed to you watching what the culture is. I'm going to, design a learning experience instead of you watching somebody else do it. Like, it's the same process. It's just different channels.
I actually think that the whole evolution of office didn't lead to very many places. The places where I've worked and the places that were in an office and the places where I hear other people have worked that were in an office were all the same, which is there was no process. You just dropped in, and like, if you don't know something, you ask. And now we're being asked to think about what we're doing and to think about how onboarding works. And yeah, it's, yes, you have to think about it. You have to be intentional about it, rather than just throwing someone in a room and again telling them, well, if you have any questions, ask someone, or ask someone that walks by, or walk over to Sandy from HR because she has all the answers. Like, that's not how it works anymore. We actually have to think about things, because otherwise people feel lost. And yeah, I think about how we do things at remote, and I got really nice feedback from one of my colleagues the other day. He said, it was so nice that Kia, who is one of the people working with us, Kia sent me a message like, oh, it's now been a month since you've worked here. How are you? Do you feel like you got to know a lot of people and such? And it's that little thing, Kia, that just sends an email to every person if they worked for us for a month. But she thought about that, and she was like, she implemented that, and it's so low stakes to make people happy, to give people a feeling like, oh, they really care about me here, because all she did was send a single email asking if everything was okay, if the person needed anything else. I just don't I don't think the office was that great.
Like, absolutely. Yeah, well, I mean,
that's obvious.
We have a biased opinion, but I agree with you. But I mean, that's the thing, though, is there is nowhere to hide in company culture, right? Like, you can't fall behind the default of, well, we spend 8 hours a day together in the same room and in the same building. Of course, we're a unified team. But then when everybody's suddenly independent, then it just holds this mirror up to say, whoa, are we actually unified? Do we care about each other? Do we see each other? Do we are we actually streamlined and dependent on each other as a team? And some companies saw good things when that mirror was held up, and some companies did not. And so yeah, in distributed work environments, there's no room to hide. If you say you have a culture of empathy and trust and connection and communication, you have to do those things, because if it's just like with our assignments and our tasks, right? This is results-based work environment. That's how we see productivity, and that's how we see culture too, is if we are actually implementing these values in our teams and facilitating effective communication and giving feedback with trust and empathy, you see that, you feel that, you engage with that on a daily basis, as opposed to just having a poster on the wall that says, we trust you and we value your opinion. And then you go to your supervisor and say, I have an idea. And they say, that's not your place, go away, which we've all experienced. And it's like, wait a second, the poster says something very different than what you're saying right now.
Going back a little bit to the international thing, do you think it is the considerations are different given that we have more international workers? Do people, leaders of HR departments have to think more about, how does this work for everybody around the world, other than the fact that, we are remote?
Yeah, absolutely. This is, there was a big wave in the early 90s when travel was suddenly affordable enough for globalization and international business to really come to fruition. And so there was a big wave of training. I think it was just called global culture training, but where there would be this very formal experience where somebody would come in, to your corporate office and say, okay, you're about to go on a business trip to Japan, and here are the customs that you need to know about before you go there so that you don't offend and that you respect their culture. And I absolutely think that there is a space, if not a need, for that same thing to start happening now, because we are trying to blend so many different cultures at the same time. And there's little nuances that happen, like, okay, we're celebrating an American holiday, but do I take the day off if it's a local holiday for me? And it's a local holiday for you, that's a lot of days off for a lot of different countries, right? So there's like that thing, there's the whole time zone thing, and then there's and then there's cultural things like, in India, shared family homes are a really big deal. And so if a company is saying you have to have this quiet environment to be working in video calls, that's not super realistic for that area. And then there's other countries like, Mexico and South America, where, the concept of having a really strong company culture is very touchy-feely, and that's not really important to them. And so they're, to spend a lot of time doing parties and interpersonal bonding, maybe they're not going to value that as a contributor. So yeah, there's a lot of different elements that need to be taken into consideration, which I think also comes back to that concept of geo-targeting during your talent acquisition of, yes, find the best talent wherever it is, but make sure that you're sensitive to the talent that you are recruiting to identify culture match in the beginning, and make sure that their community cultural expectations also match your company cultural expectations.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I was thinking about how do I deal with that? How do our customers deal with that? And I think the answer is not. I think we don't deal with it in any particular way. I think other than just, I think it's good for an organization to express, this is your workplace and these are your expectations about how you do work. And then what we do beyond that, we do our best to strengthen the organization. It's important that you know the people that you work with, but none of the other things are mandatory, and you have the freedom to work and not work the way you want to do it. And I think that's how we do it, and I think that's how many of the companies that we work with do it in the sense of like, we're basically agnostic of it. And we also don't force you to do anything. But it is certainly interesting. And I think the easiest example that you already gave was around the holidays. Like, what holidays do we take off? Is that a thing? Are we going to do it company wide? We solved it by just saying, you can take as many days off whenever you want. As a company, we don't observe any public holidays. It doesn't make sense for us. Like, our team is in, I don't know, 17 different countries, 20 different countries. I don't even know. And our customers are in every country in the world. We don't observe any holidays, and then whatever you want to take off, probably near the end of the year, it'll be very quiet, like in most other companies. But was it in the middle of the summer as well for a week or two. So yeah, it's very interesting, and it's challenging. And I think this is a valid conversation to have, because you come from everybody comes from a place where it's, well, we are in, I don't know, New York. And so these are the holidays we have in New York. Like, if you have other ones, you'll have to ask the day off. Even it doesn't matter where you're from. Like, we don't celebrate, to give a Dutch holiday, Sinterklaas on December 5th, which in the Netherlands, it's not a public holiday, but totally should be, because it's great. We can get into that some other time.
So this begs the question for me, is that in a lot of distributed companies, we see this need for a head of remote role, right? Somebody that is thinking exclusively about this. And I have a strong belief in the power of having a head of remote. I think it's great, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that, especially in the relationship that you have with your clients of this long-term monitoring and compliance and payroll. Do you think that companies should have a head of remote role or some type of specific designation to their HR departments that's like, somebody needs to be thinking about this full time?
Yeah, I think we have the head of remote today because HR departments they're just not used to the fact, because it is their job, I think, right? Like, I think this should be part of what HR is, and HR has to get comfortable with remote work because it is the new work. So, like, study it and get into that. Like,
you got a lot of learning to do.
If you're the head of HR, you're the head of remote. Like, so that's basically how I think. But besides that, I think there's a little bit maybe more to it, which is not said yet, which is with remote work and us working distributed, you have to start thinking explicitly and like working explicitly on your company's culture and everything that comes with it, the way you do work, where you do work, who does work, these kind of things that we are discussing. And that's something we haven't done before. So in a sense, you're almost assigning a product manager to the product of the company culture, as it were. And I think there's good reason to make that explicit and have someone do that for that reason. So yeah, I wouldn't necessarily urge everybody to hire a head of remote, but I think it's extremely important that you essentially fulfill the functions that this person would have, which is work on a company culture, think about the challenges that come with distributed work and having people all over the world and multiple time zones, and whether you're working asynchronously or not. So yeah. I think it's difficult.
It is. I think that's really interesting because ideally, yes, your HR should be a head of remote, but so should your CTO, so should your COO, so should your CEO. Like, everybody is going to be impacted by this change. And so ideally, the executive team should not be offloading this to some scapegoat and saying, oh, this is your problem, right? You're right. It should be a temporary solution to help everybody with the change management and get into the habit of thinking about their entire team with a remote first mindset. But then eventually the executive team is strong enough to just do that on their own.
I think that's a good note to end on, Laura.
I think it's perfect. It's food for thought for all of us. Well, thank you for a great discussion as always.
Likewise. Thanks, Laura.